My name is Sherelle Brown. Today's date is March 28, 2015, and I'm interviewing Mrs. Jenell Joyner on the Ball State campus as a part of the African American Alumni Oral History Project. Hello, Mrs. Joyner.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good. Let's begin. So, how old are you?
I'm 72 years old.
Okay. And where were you born?
I was born in Mississippi.
Oh, okay. How long did you live there?
Oh, I left as a child. I was about maybe almost 4 when I came north. My father found work in the steel mills. You know, I'm from the northwest Indiana, and the steel mills were hiring, and so many of the farm people, the African Americans especially, that lived on the farms and worked on the farms, came north to work in the steel mills. And then some of them went on up into the Detroit area to work in the automobile industry. And so that's how we ended up coming to the northwest Indiana, Chicago area. Mm-hmm.
So you all had your own farm, or did you work on a farm?
My father, they not their own farm. I don't know if this is called subsistence farming, where they had small plots of land. But actually what happened was that my father was one of the first African Americans to work as a Pullman porter for the Illinois Central Railroad. Then he got called to the Army, and he was in World War I. And then after coming from the Army, then they after he was released from the Army, then he came north looking for work, because I was born, my sister had been born, and my mother was a teacher there in the South. But the pay was very, very minimal. And so they came north looking for better opportunities in work. Mm-hmm.
And was the steel mills considered a better opportunity?
Well, yes, because there was work, and then they had a pay that was that you could live on, and that's why he came. But he had to do shift work. And he didn't like shift work because he didn't like leaving his family at night. You're working midnights, his family would be at home at night. So then he became a plasterer, and he started his own business. That's another story altogether. In that, there was a man there, who's deceased now. His name was Andrew Means. And he... let's see, I'm trying to think, what college was that? He went to Tuskegee. And at Tuskegee, they had, where they trained the carpenters and the plasterers and the builders. Well, he learned his trade there, and he came to the northwest Indiana area, and he became a very prominent, very successful, and he was a trustee in our church. Well, my dad, being from Mississippi, knew that there was a minister there that was also from Mississippi that he knew had a church in our area. So he came, when he came to our city, he looked up this minister. Well, Mr. Means was a trustee there. And so they got together, and he told me he needed some plasterers. And so he trained my daddy as a plasterer. And from there, my daddy started his own business. And then from there, he became a contractor where he built houses. And so that's the story of how we got there, yes.
Wow, okay. So when you left Mississippi, where did you all move to?
We moved to Gary, Indiana.
Gary, Indiana. Mm-hmm. And what was growing up in Gary like?
Okay, growing up in Gary, it was very interesting in that we were very happy. We never lacked for anything. When we first got to Gary, it was we lived in a segregated area. And not that we realized that it was segregated, because people just gravitated to the area where there were other people that were like them and that they were comfortable with, and many people moved near their relatives. And so I went to a grade school, an elementary school, from kindergarten through sixth grade, and I think we may have had one white family that lived in that particular school district. But it was my father-in-law refers to it as being living on a reservation, in that the area that we lived in, which was a large area, was called Midtown. And that's where, they had the Frable High School, they had Roosevelt High School. Those are the only two high schools now. Frable High School was a mixed school, in that the Europeans, the old Europeans, had moved and settled in that area, which was, let's see, it was really on it's in Midtown, but it was more on the western edge of it, and so that was mixed. But the rest of it, where we went on the southern edge to Roosevelt High School, that was all black there in that area. And so we lived well. Our parents worked, had steady incomes. My mother became a teacher. She was a teacher when she was in Mississippi, but she got her Indiana license when when we moved to Gary. And so we had an income. We lived well. We were very sheltered. We were insulated from any, bad things happening to us. We were watched very carefully. And so life was good growing up in Gary. We found a sweet spot. I would like to say this, that my parents grew up in the church. Their parents grew up in the church. So we were very religious. And so we depended upon the Lord a lot. And so there's a scripture said, "He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High God abides under the shadow of the Almighty." That's where we lived, in that secret place, and life was good for us.
Okay. And how did growing up in the church and having parents like you did, how did that affect the values and the things that they emphasized with you all?
Well, we were taught to be honest. We were taught to steal, not to steal. We were taught not to steal or take anything that did not belong, to us, that we didn't work hard. And we had a strong work ethic, very strong work ethic. And there were just certain moral rules that we just did not break. And our parents, when we came up, we could not call boys on the telephone. If we wanted to go to a party or something, we told them they allowed us to go, and they would not allow us to go to anyone's house unless they knew their parents and that their parents were going to be there. And so that was the life that we lived. And we were encouraged to have other friends whose parents had the same values as our parents had. And so if we had friends that was outside of that circle that, who our parents didn't know, and they didn't have the same values, we didn't let our parents know that. Mm-hmm. But we didn't veer away from the way that we were raised. And our parents were very strict. My mother did the disciplining. My father didn't, but my mother did the disciplining.
Okay, interesting. So you mentioned having a sister. Mm-hmm. Is she your only sibling?
She's my only sibling, yes.
And was she older or?
She's younger.
She's younger than you. Okay. Was she born in Mississippi? Or
Yes, we both were.
Okay. So when you were younger, the civil rights movement going on in America was just starting to be more public. And so in 1954, the Brown versus Board of Education decision to integrate schools was implemented. How did this affect you, or had you heard about it?
It did not affect us one bit because I said we lived in a reservation. And our schools had districts, and at that time you didn't move across districts. We had no busing, so we walked to school, we walked home, and our parents took us to school and picked us up. So really, it didn't impact us because we were around all African Americans, people just like us. Now, people who lived on the fringe, the outer edges, like near the Tolleson area, they would go in to Tolleson to school, and then the Emerson area, they would go into Emerson School. But those were not considered a part of Midtown. See, so those are the only two schools that I know of that. Of course, now Horace Mann was a long time. That's the high school being integrated, but and Vore School more so. But eventually, all the schools became totally African American. See, because the whites moved out and left Gary and moved to South County, which is the Maryville area. And they moved to Sherrville. They moved to, as more African Americans came in, the whites would move out.
Okay. So
it's essentially an all-black town, I should say that. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So did you all hear about things like Emmett Till?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. It was in Jet magazine, the pictures, and it was horrible. We thought that it was absolutely horrible. I will say this, that my grandparents still lived in the South, and every summer we would go south and stay with them and visit them. Now, I know the first time that I was aware of prejudice was when we were driving south, and we would always pack our lunches, and we would eat our lunches, and it was a highlight because we had the fried chicken and all the cakes and and we stopped. Well, we had passed Cairo, Illinois, and we stopped to get gas. And I got out of the car, and I was about 10 or 11 years old. And Mother said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to the bathroom." She said, "You can't go to the bathroom here. Don't you know that?" I had no idea. I said, "Why?" Because before then, I would go to the bathroom when we would get out of the car. But right at Cairo, Illinois, we could not do that. And then she had to explain to me why. When we would catch the train from Chicago going to Jackson, Mississippi, at Cairo, Illinois, which is the last stop right there on the border between Illinois and Kentucky, the train would stop, and it would stop for a long time. And somehow they would change the cars, and we would have to move because African Americans could not sit in the front of the train. They must sit in the back of the train, in the rear cars, when they entered into Dixie, the southern part of the United States. Now, I do remember that. And yet we would have to get up, and we would have to move to the back of the back rear cars, or they would, if there were enough African Americans on that train, they would take the car and somehow in the roundhouse put it near the end. I remember that. And that was my first awareness that, hey, this is kind of different. But it did not affect me negatively in that I was outraged by it. I guess because it was just I was so young. It's like, oh, well, this is happening, so.
And about how old were you when you had this realization?
I must have been about either 10, 11, or 12. I was a child then. I was a child then.
And when you would go south for the summers, did you notice anything different?
Well, yes, I did. But it never bothered me because we were so insulated. We lived good in the South. As a matter of fact, my grandparents lived on a corner that separated the black community from the white community. So that corner where they lived was the boundary line, so to speak. But we knew that when we went downtown, there were special water fountains that we could drink from. And those water fountains were always broken or were dirty. When we went to catch the train to go back north, we had a special station that had colors on it. And we would stay in that particular waiting area until our train came. And then we would get on the train. And of course, we were going back north. We had to get on the train, the cars that were in the rear.
And did your parents ever have to explain to you or try to explain to you all why this was?
And they did. Yeah, they did.
And what did they tell you all about it?
They just told us because we were, at that time, we said Negroes. And this is the way it was between blacks and whites. And that's how the rules were, and that's what we did.
And as a child, do you remember how you felt about that?
It was like you're saying, okay, if a parent said to you, you cannot cross the street because the street is too busy, because there are too many cars. Do not cross that street. Okay, and it was accepted because that was the way it was. And everybody did it. So that was the way it was. And so it was accepted. I was not outraged by it as a child.
Okay.
And then, of course, my parents always grew up that way. So they, that was a part. It's just like eating Southern food. We have the food we call the soul food that we learn to eat and love in the South. And then you come north and you're introduced to other foods. You just accept it. It was just a passing thing that you just accepted. And you learn to live within those confines. You learn to live and to function and to succeed within those particular rules.
And at what point did you become outraged about it?
I never did become, I should say, quote unquote, outraged. I thought it was wrong, and I did not think it was fair. But you learn to work within the system and manipulate the system to your advantage. That's what a lot of us learn to do.
And did anybody have to teach you how to do that?
Nope. It's something, children are like little sponges. Young people are like sponges. They just see things and they just absorb and they learn how to work the system. When how children learn to pit one parent against the other. Daddy said I can do this after mama said no. Okay, well, that's the same way it is. And nobody teaches them to do that. Nobody teaches them to lie. See? So you learn to work within the system. You learn to manipulate the system to your advantage. And that's what we learned to do.
Okay. Going back a little bit, what were your parents' names?
My mother's name was Dorothy, and my dad's name was Holly.
Okay, and what was your sister's name?
Sandra.
Okay. So you mentioned that you went to Roosevelt High School,
Mm-hmm.
and you said it was all African American.
Mm-hmm.
What was high school like for you?
Well, it was interesting. Now, I was introduced to a wider socioeconomic range of kids when I got to high school. So then there became competition between the haves and quote unquote the have-nots. I don't, for the use of a better term. And so the ones that decided not to like one group, as opposed to another, that presented a problem. So you had to learn how to get along, with them. All right. So that made it more difficult until I learned to, work the system or not be bothered or offended by the particular attitudes because of, certain things, such as if there were parties and your parents, a mom would not let you go because she did not know their parents, then, attitudes develop because of that. Oh, she thinks she's too good to come. No, it wasn't that. My parents would not let me come. I could not go to the games, some of the games, especially the basketball games, because it was so far away, and walk home. Some of the other children were allowed to walk home. One of the ways we got around it with the football game was because we had a friend we belonged to the same church, so our parents knew each other. Well, the football stadium was close to her house, and she had two older brothers. So my parents would take us to the game, and we would meet up with them, and we would get to walk home to her house, where my parents would come and pick us up. So it looked as though we were able to do things that the other children who did not have as many restrictions on them, that we were able to do what they were doing. But it was good, and we got in many instances we got more preferential treatment from the teachers because they knew our parents. Our parents were at the school, and so we would get preferential treatments in some areas.
And
which was not fair. You should get it based on your own merits.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Did your mom teach at the school that you went to?
No. When she began teaching, I was in junior high, and she always taught lower elementary education. Yes.
Okay. And you mentioned there was division in your school. Mm-hmm. And that was within the African American community.
Yeah, yes. Because Roosevelt was a totally African American school.
Okay.
There weren't even any teachers that were not of color teaching there. Yeah.
Okay. And would you say that your values were typical in the African American community at that time?
What do you mean, the values of my family?
Yes.
I'm just trying. I really don't know. I really couldn't say definitely. I think some of the other friends, they tended to have more freedom than some of the rest of us did. We did not have a lot of freedoms at all. But one thing we were able to do that kids today cannot do, we were able to walk downtown and shop, and then walk back home, and walk about 5 miles to school, and walk back home, and in groups, and they cannot do that now. because it is not safe now. You know, there's on the TV, I don't know if you saw it, about this couple. They tend to be parents of free-range children. They had free-range beliefs, and they would allow their children to walk to the library, and their young children to walk to the library and to walk around the neighborhood and go places, and they were turned in to the family services or something, because their children were not having enough supervision, and the authorities felt that they were endangering them. It was on TV. Well, up north it was on TV, and they were defending their position. Well, we did that routinely, when I was a child, but now it's not allowed because it's not safe. So I think the human condition has changed from when we were younger.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we were talking about the division in the African American community, and oftentimes we hear that there's a difference between how people are treated if you were light-skinned or if you were darker-skinned. Did you ever experience division because you are fair-skinned?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Tends the darker-skinned young people tended to be distrustful or suspicious of the lighter skin. So oh Lord, don't have hair. Oh my goodness, if you had long hair, it was horrible. And so we tended to have been ostracized, but we had our friends. When you have a community of friends, when you have support, it does not impact you as much as if you're just the one, out there by yourself. So we had our friends. It didn't make any difference. And we still see it when we go back for high school reunions. You still see it. Mm-hmm.
The same division.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Were you a part of any extracurricular activities?
In high school?
Yes.
Let's see. We had girls intramural sports, and I played on that. I ran for office of, I think I was a recording secretary, a corresponding secretary of my senior class, and I'm trying to think. Mostly, I just had to get my grades. My parents wanted me to study and make sure that I had good grades. But we did do a lot with, I think it was called the GAA, Girls Athletic, that's what it was, the Girls Athletic Association. And I was very active with that. Mm-hmm.
And what sports did you play?
Every sport that came out. So of course, I didn't do cross country, but we had the basketball. We played volleyball, and it was a form of soccer that we played. And I cannot think of what the name of that was. Mm-hmm.
Oh, and did you all play just against people within your schools, or did you?
Yes, within our schools. We had teams within the schools. Oh, and I ran track in elementary school. I ran track. I didn't in high school.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Did you only play against other African Americans?
Yes, within our school. We had a very large school, high school, and we had teams within the school. We did not go. At that time, only the boys would go and play against other schools, basketball and football, and run track. I think we ran track at a track meet against other schools in elementary school. But the girls did not play against other schools. That was just citywide. I think that might have been statewide. Now young people, they play against other schools. We didn't do that then. Only the boys did that.
Okay.
So it's changed a lot.
Right. Were you involved in any activities at your church?
As a young child?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. We had to go to Sunday school. We went to say for church services. We came back for BYPU, that's a Baptist Youth Training Program, and then had to stay for night services. So we were in 4 different services every Sunday. And we would get home, and it was, I don't know if you remember the Loretta Young show. But she would come and throw this door open, and she'd have a pretty dress on, and she'd twirl around, and she would welcome the audience to the new show. We got home, and Mama would let us stay up long enough to see Loretta Young twirl into the room, and then we'd have to go to bed because we had to go to school the next day. So anyway, Sunday was a full day of church. So I ended up going to church, and the little things that kids do. They let you be the secretary, they let you of something, they'll let you chair a meeting, and I learned to play the piano, and then they would let me play the piano for, when some of the kids' programs when they would sing, and I would, as an adult, I did join the choir, though I can't sing. They convinced me to join the choir, and then I played the organ sometimes, but that was about, it, yeah.
Right, okay. And going back to high school, you were actually in high school when the Little Rock 9 incident happened in Arkansas, I believe it was. How did you hear about this?
I'm trying to remember. Now, what was Little Rock 9?
It's when, it was Alabama, when 9 high schoolers were actually the first black students to go to a formerly all-white school.
Yes, I remember that. It was Governor Wallace, wasn't it? That was the governor then.
Oh, it's Arkansas. Sorry.
Arkansas?
Yes, sorry.
Was that Governor Wallace? Faubus, okay. But Wallace he did something. I remember him. I remember that. Was that Ruby Bridges? With the Little Rock 9? No. Okay. Well, no. I don't remember that.
I think the Little Rock 9 was high school.
It is, right? And that's right. She was elementary.
Mm-hmm.
So, just talk about the school desegregation in general.
Okay.
The aftermath of the Brown decision.
Okay. Did you all hear about the large things happening down south when they tried to desegregate the schools?
Yes. I think it was Ruby Bridges that this was in Alabama, I think, and Governor Wallace was the governor, and he stood firm, and he was not going to let the schools be desegregated, and they had to call in the guard, and they had to have federal marshals to take this little girl, little bitty thing, into school, and bless her heart, it makes me tear up. She walked in there, and she had a teacher, her white teacher, who welcomed her with open arms, and it was so good to her. And so, yes, I remember that. And I remember the jeering. I remember this one little girl who, and all of these adults and these big old burly men, just cursing at her and jeering. But she walked in with her head up high. Yes, I remember that well. And I remember when Charlene, I can't remember her name now. When she went to, I can't remember the college now, but she went desegregated a college. And the man, Ole Miss, I remember when he came in. James Meredith, yes, I remember that, and what he had to go through also. They paid a lot of dues for us. And I remember Charlene came in and she went through school. And one of the things that she said, that when she went, that she had to have the courage of her own convictions. And that was one of the things that there comes a time when you know that right is right. Whether people are against you or not, you must have the courage of your own convictions to stand for what you believe.
Yes. And did you all see these events on TV?
Yeah, yes, we did. And I remember when they had the March on Washington. I think I was in college then. Oh, and we had friends that were getting on buses, and they were traveling down south for that first. No, that wasn't the March on Washington. They were desegregating the school. They were desegregating. And they brought the fire hoses and the dogs out after them. Well, our friends, the guys they got on these buses and they went south. And I knew I didn't want to go because I knew my parents were not going to let us go. But I mean, they were gung-ho, and they really ran into a barrage of difficulty. But we see the fire hoses now on TV. We see the dogs, and this was during the time that I think I was in my early 20s when that happened. And so many people of the young people from our area got on buses and went down there. I'm thinking it was, I can't remember which state that was. Birmingham. That's right, Birmingham, yeah.
Okay. So watching these things happen on TV, even in high school, how did it make you and your family feel?
Well, I felt that it was interesting, and I was thought that the people who were doing these things were very brave. I didn't know that I would have the fortitude to do anything like that. I know my parents weren't going to let me do anything like that. But it was so interesting when I would go south in the summertime. These things were going on down there. I know I was down there once, and there was this huge explosion, and somebody had bombed one of the buildings where the civil rights workers would come, and they bombed that building. But I'm from the area where they had the 3 civil rights workers that were killed there in Philadelphia, Mississippi area. See Cheney, and I'm trying to think of Swerner, and there was one other. And anyway, they were there in my hometown. And what is so interesting is that they found them they have a dam that they had built, a reservoir that they had built. And they found them, I think, buried in some of the dirt and stuff there. But seemingly, who turned them in, this is oral history, this is what we hear, was I think it was the Methodist or the Presbyterian minister in town. But there was also there in town a dress shop, which was a very, very exclusive dress apparel shop for women. And these people that owned it, they helped to turn in information to catch these guys who killed these 3 civil rights workers. And do you know the citizens of that town ran them out of business? They refused to give them to do business with them, and so they lost their business. And then there was a minister who also helped, who couldn't live with what had happened to the 3 civil rights workers, and he helped to turn state's evidence. That's the story that they tell in the city. But one of the guys who was the sheriff there, he was a big man, and he was scary. He was known to kill black people. But what they do not know is that he loved black women. And the black men that he would kill would be the women, the men that had an eye for his black women that he liked. So he was very bigoted in one area, but in another area he was not. And I understand from the citizens that he was one of the nicest people, that you would want to meet. But they say, and I do not know if it's true or not, that he may have known something about what happened to the civil rights workers. But my father's sister, who was a nurse, and she worked at a veterans hospital, and he got very ill, and he had to go to the veterans hospital, and guess who was his nurse? My aunt. But she said he was the nicest man, very nice. So you have people with these personalities that are strong persons who are bigoted, but on the other hand, they can be very, very kind. For instance, as I told you, my grandparents lived on the corner that was the separation and the division line where the white community began and the black community ended, or the black community ended and the white community began. All the neighbors got along fine. They got along fine. They would go chat with each other, and the policeman down the street had the little boys, and they would come and they would get my fruit out of my grandparents' fruit trees, and he would march them right back, and he would say, you don't go in anybody's yard and get their fruit off of their fruit trees unless you ask. And he made them call them Mr. and Mrs. So there is something that's kind of was strange there in that little area in the South.
Okay, and you said that was Philadelphia, Mississippi?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Bringing it back a little bit, you graduated from high school in 1961,
mm-hmm.
correct? And you started at Ball State the fall of that same year?
Mm-hmm.
Why did you want to pursue higher education?
It was expected. My great-grandfather was a teacher. My grandmother was a teacher. My mother was a teacher. So it was expected. And my mother told me, she says, look, I was thinking about being a nurse. And my father told me, he said, I don't want you to become a nurse because I don't want you to do shift work. His sister was a nurse, and she would have to work, midnights, and he didn't want me to do that because of his concerns about safety. And so my mother said, look, you become a teacher. She said, you never know. Your husband may be able to take care of you and care for you. He may not be able to. But you will always have work. She didn't know. Today, the teaching is not, dependable. But you will always have work if you are a teacher. And so I said, well, I just might as well go on to be a teacher. But at that time, women, and African American women in particular, didn't have anything else to do. We could get married out of high school. We could become a secretary, a nurse, teacher, or social worker. So really, that's all that we had to essentially choose from. If you wanted to go into medicine, or if you wanted to go into law or anything else, it was difficult. The males, even the black males, made it very difficult for you back then. Now, you young people have the world open, for you. But that back then, those are the occupations that we could easily go into.
And how would males make it difficult for women?
How? Well, when you go to school, you work in, groups. You'd have to, do cooperative learning, those types of things. You go into where are you going to live? Where are you going to go shower? Where are you going to, when you're living in the dormitories? See, if you're going to go into a med school, you're going to live on the campus, they have to have a space for you to live. Who are you going to study with? Anyone who's going to, take you seriously enough that, hey, you are a student and you are serious about your learning, so we can work together and not, it have to become a romantic type of thing, you see. So females have had a hard time, a hard way to go. I just was reading The Secret Lives of the First Ladies, and it's interesting how they had to there's no job description for her. And each first lady has to make her own way. She gets no salary. And so she has to make her own way. Females traditionally have had to make their own way and find a spot for themselves. But we were accepted in those fields of secretary, a social worker, teacher, nurse, get married, and depend on your husband. Back then.
So speaking of females on campus, there's something called an MRS degree where women were set to go to school to find a husband. Did you ever feel that kind of pressure?
No, I had a boyfriend before I went to Ball State. Yeah, we met in that's as a matter of fact that's Bill. We've been married for about 50 years. Anyway, but we were dating when I came to Ball State. So that pressure was not on me,
Okay, so you met your husband in Gary before.
We went to high school together. Mm-hmm. We went to the senior prom together.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and why did you choose Ball State?
Well, I really didn't know where I wanted to go to college. I really hadn't thought about it. And I knew I was going to have to go to college because that was one of the requirements in my family. And I had a friend who went to high school with me. And she came home and she was talking about Ball State. And I said, oh, she said, where are you going? I said, to college. I said, I don't know. I hadn't thought about it. And so she invited me to come down to Ball State and visit her one weekend. And I did. And so I came. And as I said, the Lord has blessed me. I've been in the secret place of the Most High God because I have been able to find a sweet spot all my life and live and stay in that sweet spot. When I came here, it was, I liked it. We were some of the first non-white to live in the dormitory. And it was, we were very insulated here at Ball State. People were nice to us. They took care, took good care of us. We never wanted for anything. Now, those people who did not live in the dormitory, and there were very few of us who lived in the dormitories, lived in off-campus housing. We could not live in any housing that surrounded, that was near the university. We had to go, the African-American students had to go into town, into the black areas. And that's the only place that they could find housing if they were not living in the dorm. And as I said, very few African Americans that lived in the dorm. They had maybe 2 in Crosley, 3 in Brady, and of course all these other buildings hadn't been built, because behind Woodworth Hall, those were soybean fields and cornfields, all of that. I think they started building Noyer my sophomore year, I think. That was the first one that they built. And then they had, what's that building, the dorm, DeMott. Is it still DeMott?
No,
it is. Okay, DeMott. We had DeMott. We had Lucina. And then there were some barracks, Army barracks, that was housing for girls. And they tore that down, I think, in my sophomore year there. And then of course they had Elliott for the men. Oh, I don't know if there's another. There might have been another one for the men. I'm not sure. But that was all that was here. But anyway, so the housing for off-campus housing for African Americans was very poor. And it was some of the students who saw the discrepancies between the types of housing and that they started pushing for housing to open up for African Americans around the school, that's near the school, as off-campus housing. To the extent that it's done, I do not know. But I know when I went to school here, that was not allowed. And they would congregate in the tally and wait for their buses to go to ride home. But as a result of that, we stayed on the campus. When I said we, our little group, Connie Winfrey and I, we're from Gary. My roommate, Nancy Joe, and I Lou from Indianapolis. And then, of course, a couple of the others that were in the Wood Hall and can't even think of the other hall. So we would kind of stay together. We had fun together. We stay up 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning playing cards. We had a ball. But we didn't get caught up in the other things that were going on around us because we had the support of each other. When you have a support system, you can make it. See, so we had the support of each other, and we had a ball. We were very insulated. We had no trouble with our professors. We had no trouble with any of the girls that we lived with in the halls. We ate together. We visited each other in their rooms. But we did notice when we went to class and we were walking on the campus and they were with their boyfriends, we became invisible. They would not speak to us. Now, we did notice that. But because we had our support system, it didn't bother us. We said, well, oh well. But we knew that was evidently one of the unwritten rules. Now, as an adult, and I graduated, and then I left and came back as a board member of the Alumni. We would come and have dinners, and we would various functions. And I would be by myself sitting with the table of people. And especially the guys, you would hear them talk about, yes, Professor such and such and such. He really took care of us. I said, took care of us? What does he mean? They would turn their, I guess, fair-haired boys, fair-haired whoever, onto various programs, various, programs that they could use that would help them later, or scholarships. I'm just imagining this, but yeah, he really looked out for us and took care of us. And I would hear them talking about, this never happened for any of us. We were treated well. Nothing was given to us. Nothing was taken from us. We earned everything that we got. We were insulated against anything bad happening to us. But nothing, we were not mentored. Let me put it that way. We were not mentored. And I imagine you would need to have to ask, but we didn't know the questions to ask. We did not have the experience. As a matter of fact, I never was in a non-Black situation until I came to Ball State. This was my first experience of interacting with white people. My first as a college student. I was in an all-Black elementary school, all-Black junior high school, and middle school. So this was my first time interacting. So I did not know the questions to ask or how to get involved beyond that of going to class, getting my work done, and figuring out how to do that. Now, it's my understanding now that Ball State has all kinds of mentoring and tutoring, programs. We did not have that back then.
Okay. And you mentioned this is the first time you went to an all-Black high school and middle school. How was that transition for you?
It was interesting. I think I was more curious than anything else. Yeah. No, I went to an all-Black high school, middle school, and grade school. This is my first time going to a majority school where I was in the minority. It was interesting. I didn't suffer any adverse effects. I never thought any more about it, but it was a curiosity. I just learned, I observed, and I just took mental notes. I learned the unwritten rules.
And what were those rules?
Well, the first thing, you're not going to get, if you don't ask questions, you're not going to be given any information. Okay? So, I didn't know what questions to ask. So I'm sure that there were certain things that I could have taken advantage of and, used if I had known what questions to ask. But by the same token, I knew that other people who were not of color would probably get preferential treatment over me. That kind of thing. So this is something that you just learn. As I said, you learn you learn the rules. There's certain things that I knew I didn't even try to ask for because I probably should not have done that, but that I wouldn't ask because I knew I probably was not going to be granted, certain things. So I just didn't do it. But we got through. We got an excellent education. When we got out of Ball State, we were prepared. All of the Ball State graduates that I know of that came back and that were teaching, they were heads and shoulders above all of the other, in education, above all of the other new teachers that were in the field. Heads and shoulders above them. Then as I went on and the charter school movement came about, I said, whoa, when Ball State started licensing all of these charter schools. They licensed, I know, at least 5, maybe as much as 8, in the Gary school system. Now I am bitter. And you see, before I didn't become incensed and bitter, but I'm bitter now. Yes, I am retired, but I came to Ball State when it was a teacher's college. As I think of my junior year, it became a university. And Ball State has turned out excellent teachers. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of teachers that they've turned out. Now these same teachers that they have turned out are losing jobs because the school systems are losing students because the charter schools are taking the students. And when your population dwindles, they have to get rid of teachers. And so now these same teachers, the Ball State has done such a magnificent job in educating and preparing for education, they know they're not getting jobs because school systems are not hiring. I know the Gary school system is not hiring. They're in the throes of letting teachers go. And then where do these teachers have to go? If they go into the charter schools that Ball State has licensed, they're going in for half the salaries. So I am very incensed and I'm very upset about that. And I have mentioned it. I have, there's a lady that's excellent special needs teacher that refuses to give any money. She said, don't even call me until you can do something about this situation that you have caused with charter schools. So that's where I'm standing now with Ball State. I am through all the civil rights, through all everything else, I tended to be pretty, even not. I knew it was wrong, but I did not get incensed. But I am incensed about this because I don't think that many people realize that the genesis of charter schools came about in the South during the time of desegregation, where the schools were being desegregated. And these parents who refused to allow their children, who did not want their children to go to school with African American children, found a way to get around the system. They started charter schools using public funds. Yes, charter schools use public funds. And that's how they started in the Deep South. I used to know the name of the states, but I can't remember them anymore. That's the genesis of charter schools. Now it's here now, all up north, all in Indiana. Now, what is going to happen in some charter schools? They have, I don't know, it may be in all of them, I don't know. They have a lottery system. Or you get, who is to say that the lottery system is fair? And I know one thing that they do in the Gary area is that when they get children from the traditional public schools into the charter schools, and they're not working out, they let their parents know, well, your child is not working out here, so we can't keep them anymore. This is after the state has paid the per capita head for every child, for that child. Then they come back to the traditional public school, but we don't get the money with which to educate them with. See? So that is not good. I mean, that incenses me also. And then the fact that when you get Governor Pence, and it was on the news today and it's been on the news this week, saying that, what is it, religion, with people who are in a certain religion, they don't have to hire people that are not their religion. Can't you see this going into the school system? And we're going to go back to the way it was before segregation, where we're having quote unquote separate but equal schools, when actually they were separate and still unequal schools. I see that going back that way, and it just hurts me and disappoints me so much just to know that the part that Ball State has, in the state of Indiana, has played in that, in licensing charter schools. And when you think about the fact that there is not a charter school that I am aware of in Muncie, Indiana. So that's where my anger is lying now.
Right. I can see that. Really.
Now, see, it doesn't bother me. I am retired. But when I think about what a wonderful education this school has given to teachers and what good work those teachers do and could be doing, and, they can't get work now. If they get work, if they get it in the charter schools, it's going to be for less than what the traditional school. It just bothers me. But the fact that it might be leading us to years down, I might not live to see it, but years down the road, wherein we will not be able to get a good free education, because they're plucking the cream of the crop off the charter. So there's something very insidious about charter schools, and I'm just very uncomfortable with it.
Okay. So when you were at Ball State, actually, when you were pursuing your teaching degree, how, you said you didn't ask certain questions because you didn't know to. Mm-hmm. What kind of questions didn't you ask?
Okay, such as there are some students that have come out in certain fields. And I said, how did you know to get into this particular course of study to come out in this field? Oh, well, my guidance counselor looked at I guess they took some tests and looked at my tests and said that my strengths and talents lie here, and they steered this girl into this particular field. Okay? I didn't know to do that. They didn't have that when I was here. I didn't know to ask for what scholarships might be available, though my parents were able to pay for my education. Again, here I'm at an alumni dinner, and there is this guy who's sitting there, and he is the head and owner of a big CPA firm. And he's bragging about the fact that his daughter got a full ride here at Ball State. Why? Because she took golf. Golf was her area. So she got a golf scholarship, and she's a minority. How is she a minority? Because she's a female. See, those types of things, of information that we could use, we don't get. We didn't. Let me put it this way. We didn't get, and I did not know to ask. Up north, I doubt very seriously if they know that there are golf scholarships that students can get, or there, would be going into golf. These kinds of things, questions still that could be asked that would help students to go through school, the mentoring process that would help to guide and lead students through schools that would help them and make it easier for them. I did not know to ask, and I still might not know many of the questions to ask. But I'm saying that the mentoring process within the schools could have been better for African Americans. It was not, but it was there in place for the white students.
And when you were on campus, did you notice that?
No, I said I found that out after I became a mature adult, and then thought back on my experience. All we knew to go to school, to go to class, to get our work, and to make our grades so that we could graduate. And that's essentially what we did. We got no more and no less than what we came for. That's it. And we were very insulated. We lived a happy life. We lived good. We found a sweet spot, and we lived in that sweet spot. We didn't raise any. The ones that, there was one guy, I called him the angry young man. He is now he works attorney, who was a state's attorney. Never lost a case. He's a graduate. I won't call his name. But he stayed angry all the time. He was just angry all the time. But I guess he knew what the rest of us were not mature enough to see and could not see. And he's still angry when he comes back to the university. He is still angry because he was able to see things that we couldn't see. And evidently, we were not mature enough to understand what he was trying to articulate to us.
And this young man was African American?
Mm-hmm. He's an old man now, but he was young then. Mm-hmm. I think the males were more militant than we were, because as females we were always at home, cared for and sheltered and insulated, and they were like out there.
And before we talked about your parents were strict, how did that factor into your education and going away to college?
I knew that when I went away to college, the morals and mores that we had at home, oh no, you don't stray from them. I knew that. I knew I could not come home with any bad reports. I knew that. Not that I had been threatened with anything, not that I feared my parents. No, it was just something in me that said, hey, there are certain things we do, there are certain things that we don't do. And that's just the way I was raised. This is us.
Okay. And when you were here, were you a part of any extracurricular activities?
Mm-hmm. No. Oh, I did. We had a interest group. We were Kappa Sigmas, and we were an AKA interest group, and I was very involved with them. And my parents are not Greek. So they didn't belong to any sorority or fraternity. So I really was not drawn one way or the other, where it was Delta Sigma Theta or Kappa, AKA. Those are the only two. No, Delta Sigma Theta was the only sorority, African American sorority that was on campus. And then, of course, they got this little Kappa Tau Sigma, which was an AKA interest group. And the Kappa Tau Sigmas were told then, well, you got Delta Sigma Theta. Why do you need another sorority? And then you stop and look, you had all of these white sororities, all of these white Greek fraternities, and you want to limit us to one. That's what one of the Maxine told. And I forget which president that was. I forget which one. And so we never did get, while we were here, get an AKA sorority on campus. But I was very involved with that little interest group. And we were, this was about, 30 of us. And so we formed a support system for each other. We had fun. We would have parties and, things like that. And then there was only Kappas. There was only the one black Greek organization that was Kappa Alpha Psi while we were here. I'm sure that there are others there now.
So you mentioned that the president at the time would not let you?
No. I said, I think it was the president. This was told to me. I was not instrumental in trying to get the Kappa Tau Sigma interest group. You had to go through certain procedures, is my understanding, to even get an interest group. And they were told that you got Delta Sigma Theta, why don't you all just go on and join Delta Sigma Theta? Well, these were young women whose mothers and aunts and sisters were AKAs from, Indianapolis and, around, and they wanted an AKA sorority as opposed to, Delta Sigma Theta. The reason I joined the Kappa Tau Sigmas was because my friends belonged. I didn't care one way or the other because, as I said, there's no Greek history in my background. So I wouldn't care one way or the other. But my friends belonged. And the ones that we lived all in Woodworth Halls. And so they belonged because they had aunts and mothers that were, AKAs. And that's why I joined. That's the only reason.
So you and your friends are mostly part of Alpha Kappa Alpha, or AKA?
AKA, yes, but it wasn't that. It was Kappa Tau Sigma then. This was years after we left, several years after we left, before they got the sorority, AKA. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
When you were on campus, were there strict laws?
Strict laws?
As in curfews?
Yes, we did have curfew. And I can't remember. I think we had to 10 o'clock during the weekdays and midnights on the weekends. We had to be in by midnight. But if you were not going to come in, you could sign out, but you had to tell where you were going to be or something. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We had no co-ed dorms, none. And the guys could only come in the lounge area and stay in the lounge area. I'm not stay, but visit you in the lounge area. We did not have telephones in the rooms. We got telephones in our rooms, I guess, when we were sophomores. But when I came in as a freshman, we had to go to the payphone in the hall and call out. Let's see. Hmm. No TVs in the rooms. We had one TV, and it was down in the lounge. And do you know we all got along well with that TV? Nobody, we had no arguments, no anything about that TV. When someone was watching the TV, you sat down and watched what they were watching. If they got up and left, then you could turn the TV. I do not remember in 4 years any type of disagreement over a program on the TV. And when Martin Luther King was killed, everybody was watching the news. When Kennedy got killed, everybody was there watching the news and crying there in the line. We never had problems with that TV. And none of us had TVs in our rooms. They were not allowed. I don't think the electrical system at that time would handle it, nor phones,
So you
nor
mentioned,
computers. Nothing, no.
so you mentioned when John F. Kennedy, the president at that time, was killed, you all were watching it on the TV?
In the lounge, that one TV, yes. It was one of those floor model TVs. We didn't have the big screen or anything. It was one of those floor model TVs, and we were all sitting around watching it. Yeah. It's like another world, isn't it?
And what was the reaction like? Was it the same among everybody?
Everybody. Everybody. Even with Martin Luther King. Everybody.
And with some of the other civil rights movements going on at the time, did you all see more of those? Like the more controversial and the marches and things like that? Did you all
I don't
see those on
remember.
TV?
I don't remember anybody discussing or saying anything about it. I do not remember that.
Okay. Did you ever, we talked about the discrimination that was going on in the housing around the campus. How would you say your relationship was with the Muncie community at large?
We didn't deal with the Muncie community. We really, I said we were insulated here. We stayed on campus. The off-campus students would tease us, and they said we would hide. They said we hid in the dorms, but we didn't. We had no reason and no need. Everything we needed was here. Even as an adult now, thinking back on it with the housing situation that's different now, I think I would want to continue to live in the dorm. Why would I want to have an apartment that I would have to clean, I would have to cook for myself, and why? I like living in the dorm where I didn't have the upkeep. My breakfast, my lunch, and my dinner was served to me. I didn't have dishes to wash. I didn't have to go shop for groceries. We had to, on Fridays, we were not, they didn't, the cafeteria was closed. So we went out to eat. That was the only time. There was a little diner. Oh, I can't think of what the name of that diner was. It was there on University Avenue, next to the drugstore. And I can't think of that man who owned the drugstore. But we integrated that one. We never saw any African Americans in there eating. And so we called to see if any, blacks came to eat there, were allowed to eat there. And they said, yeah, you can come in. So we did. We went in and we sat down to order. And all the cooks in the back were black. And you could see them all looking out of the window from the kitchen, looking at us. Because we were the first, well, we must be the first ones to come here. But I remember we did venture out and we did that. hmm And I can't remember the name of that little restaurant. It was right next to, was there a Dalby's drugstore or something? There on the corner of, maybe, I don't, there on the, if you walk straight down the street here, and at the university, there was a drugstore that was there. And then right next to it was that little restaurant. And the food was good. We had mashed potatoes and gravy and roast beef and everything. Yeah, but I think we were the first ones to go there. Although all the cooks back there were African American. They were so happy to see us in there.
And there was no resistance to that?
No, we called first. No, there was no resistance. No.
So you mentioned that one summer when you were going to Mississippi, you all heard of the three or four civil rights workers being killed?
Oh, no. We were not going there. I don't know how old I was. I must have been in my 20s then when we heard about it up north. But then we would constantly travel in the summers going back and forth. Yeah, but it had happened. We were still up north. And we went down there. It was not too long after they had that murder that's when the civil rights workers started pouring into that area. And it was called a COFO building. I don't know what those are. That's what those are acronyms for. But that's when we heard the large bomb explosion. And my grandfather came in and said, "Yeah, they just blew up the COFO building." And so that's was one of the times that I got kind of, afraid. But we were totally insulated down there. I never felt fear. As a matter of fact, we had more freedom down there as children than we had up north because we had to stay on our block up north. I mean, we had relatives all over. And so we would go from one relative to the next. We grew like Topsy down there. Just get up in the morning and we would just rip and run. But everybody was watching out, playing with our cousins, watching out for us. See, we had more fun. But we had the freedom, but because African Americans in the South, whole families tended to live in the same areas, in the same blocks. So, we were all just taken care of, and we had more fun and true freedom. And it saddens me that children today it's not safe for children just to rip and run and grow like Topsy in the summertime because it's not safe anymore.
Okay. Do you remember being on campus when you heard of Malcolm X being shot?
Yes. And he was more, it didn't impact us the way Kennedy and Martin Luther King's death affected us. At the time, we didn't know a whole lot about him. He was more of a curiosity to us. We didn't know a lot about him until after his death and all the information and what he tried to do and his life story came out and we started reading about that. That's when it impacted us after we found out, what his life was all about and what he was about. That's when it impacted us, but not at the time of his death. It was more of a curiosity.
Okay. On campus, what was the relationship like between African Americans and the African American community as a whole on campus?
I don't think the African American community as a whole did much here on campus. I know some of the young people would come if we had a party, like, a large party, like the Kappas would give a large party. Some of them would come. But as far as a relationship between the African American community in Muncie and the few African Americans here on campus, I don't think that there was, to my knowledge, a relationship. I don't think there was. Not that I know of.
And how?
I did, and there, I didn't really know anybody that lived in the city. There was one family, Dr. Thomas, Penny Thomas, and her husband. I don't know what his name was. He was the only dentist in the city. He was African American, and I think they were the only, I would say, economically comfortable people at that time. He was well known. And Penny was our sponsor of the, you have to have a sponsor for your interest group. And our interest group, for AKA was Kappa Sigma. And she was an AKA, and so she committed to being agreed to be our sponsor. And so she was about the only one that I knew. And I don't know that she, we never met anybody else. I'm saying Muncie is a totally different place today as far as African American people having, significant income, homes, and socioeconomically. It is totally different today than it was back then. Totally different.
Okay, and what about the feeling between African American students on campus?
Each other on campus?
Yes, ma'am.
We got along. I think the AKAs were jealous of the Deltas, and the Deltas were jealous of the AKAs, because when they would have their time to get members, and I shouldn't say AKAs, I should say the Kappa Sigmas. We tried to attract their possible members, and they tried to attract our possible members. But as far as any real antagonistic episodes between any of us, I am not aware of any. Mm-hmm. We tended to pretty much get along.
Okay. What were your relationships like with your professors here?
Good. I never had problems with any of them. Whatever I didn't like or care about, a professor, it was the same thought that the other, students had, whether they were of color or of non-color. I mean, I didn't have any problems with any of them. I felt that I was treated fairly. And I felt that I was treated fair. Whatever I put in to the particular subject area or coursework, I got out of it. I was treated fairly, I felt. I was graded on the same grading scale. If I needed to talk with the professor, I made an appointment, and they were always there, and they were always, open, to talk with me. So I had no problems. And I have not heard of any of the other students that would have any problems. I know one of our friends talked about one professor, and I won't call his name, but they say that he was horrible. They say that it would break his fingers to have to give an A. He'd only give C's. And so I said, oh, really? So I made up my mind I was going to make an A out of his class. I studied. I studied. I went, and he said that you could have extra credit. I signed up for every extra credit. Guess what? I got an A. I was one of the few that got an A. But I worked for it. I earned it. And that was across the board. It was not, you could hear everybody talk about him. How the highest grade he would ever give was a C. Well, but, the A was there if you wanted it bad enough.
And you lived in Woodworth when you were here, an all-girls dorm.
Mm-hmm.
You said, did you all, having few African-American students living in there, did you all ever experience any tension between any of the other girls living in the dorm?
Mm-mm. As I said, we got along fine. Beautifully. We would visit each other's room. We'd laugh and talk. We sat at the same tables at dinner. Do you guys have family-style dining? You still have that?
Yes,
Then you have the maitre d's to come and seat you?
No.
Oh, yes. Well, we would go and we'd get our food, and then we'd have our maitre d'. He would take our tray and take us to a table, and he would hold our chair, and we would sit down, and he would, put our food on our table, and then he would take the tray, and he would. That's how we ate dinner, and so we really didn't choose who we ate with, So he would sit us where he would seat us, and we all got along fine. We'd have nice conversations and everything. But as I said, when we left going to class and they were with their boyfriends, that's when we became invisible. They did not speak to us as though they didn't even see us. Then we would get back in the dorm, get back in class, everything was fine. We were just like, long lost friends.
And how did that difference of treatment make you all feel?
We just knew that's the way it was. That was life. That's just the way it was. And we knew what to expect.
Okay. So you graduated from Ball State in 1965.
Mm-hmm.
What did you do after graduation?
After graduation?
Yes, ma'am.
I went to graduate school. I went to in Chicago, which is nice. My master teacher that I did my student teaching under was a graduate of DePaul University. And so she encouraged me to go there. My mother was the type of a person, she says, you start your graduate work right away. Because if you don't, once you start working, once you get some paychecks, it's too hard to go back. You get comfortable. So I went on to graduate school, and because my master teacher had talked about, DePaul so much, and it was a school where, I could go, during the day. So many of them you would have to go, at night. But I could go during the day. I would get on the train. I would catch the South Shore train. And it was a commuter train. It would leave from South End and come all the way through to downtown Chicago. And I was at the downtown campus in Chicago. And so I would catch the train, and I would go in, and I'd have my classes. And I might have sometimes 2-3 hours between classes. So I would go down to Marshall Fields, and I would treat to the tea room, and I would treat myself to lunch. I became a fantastic people watcher. I would go to at the time, it was Chicago Library. If you ever you get to Chicago, and it's no longer the library, but this building was built in the 1800s. No amount of money could replace that building now. And old man Daly, the first mayor, wanted to tear that building down. And his wife Maggie said, John, you're not going to touch that building. You would go in that building, and it was like 4 stories. But you would stand on the first floor, and there were winding stairways, and you could look all the way up to that 4th floor. But all the walls were inlaid pearl. All of the walls, every bit in mosaics, all the way up to the top. And then at the top was a dome, and it was inlaid mother of pearl. Gorgeous. Now, that's on the Washington Street side. On the Randolph Street side, all of the work around there was gold leaf. And the artisans that did it, they are gone. And they don't have, they came over from Europe. Anyway, he wanted to tear that building down. Anyway, it's still there. I would spend hours in there. I would do my research at that time it was a library. I would do my research there. I'd go shopping. It was wonderful. That's how I got to know Chicago, because I went to school there.
So you went to school in Chicago, but you still lived in Gary?
Gary is interesting. I can get to downtown Chicago from Gary quicker than most people who live in Chicago suburbs can get to downtown. It is a 30-minute train ride from Gary to Chicago, to downtown Chicago. So, and what's so interesting, that little train is a commuter train, and people ride that train for years and years because they're going to work from South Bend to Chicago, and from Michigan City and East Chicago, to Chicago. The same conductors have worked that train for years, so they get to know all of their passengers. So you can get on that train, and if you are sleepy, you can go to sleep. And guess what? They wake you up before your stop to make sure that you get off and, get there on time. One girl got her purse snatched as she was getting on in Chicago. And so she was just so upset. She says, well, my ticket was in my purse. And the conductor said, you've been riding this train for years. Get on the train. Just get on. There's no problem. But it became a family. And that was another thing that made it, so nice. So anyway, I had the best of both worlds. I got a chance to spend a lot of time in a world-class city without having to live there. And I still spend, because of my experience, going to graduate school in Chicago, we still spend a lot of time, in Chicago, going shopping and, things like that.
And you got your master's in 1969?
I think so. Things are getting really fuzzy. It's so long ago. Yeah, I think so. Because I started right, after I graduated. And because of my mother, she said, if you let any time lapse, it's too hard to go back. You're in the studying mode now. Just keep it up. You got, 3 years maybe, and it'll be over with. But don't get out of the studying mode. And she was right. She was right.
Okay, and that was from DePaul University.
Mm-hmm.
So moving forward a little bit, you were on the Boston University Alumni Council from 2001 to 2009. What was that like?
Interesting. I don't know exactly why I was on there, except that I did make considerable contributions to the university. And one of the things that did bother me is that they have like their board of, the board of directors, but their trustee board. Not the trustee board, but some of the people who are trustees are on that particular board. I can't think of the name of the president, the vice president, Anyway, whatever the Alumni Council wants to do, they set that agenda before they have the big meeting, where all the other board members are. And so it's essentially rubber stamped by everybody else. So I didn't feel that, I had any input as to, getting a vote to make any, kind of a difference. I did serve on that alumni council because they do need representatives from various sectors, and I was African American from Northwest Indiana. So I fit two of those requirements. They did not have anybody from Northwest Indiana who was also African American and female. So that was one of the reasons I think that, and my contributions, that I think that I was there. I did become a contributor to the university because I felt that the education was excellent. And I gave because I wanted students to have access. I would give to the scholarship fund to, have scholarships. And then we started a Black scholarship fund, and we would give to that so that Black students could have access to money to help them get through school.
Okay. And what was your relationship like with the alumni on the council?
Tentative. They were nice. They would say hello and they would chat, but I was not, one of the in groups. Was not one that, they would come sit down, let's have dinner, or, anything of that type. No. Tentative. And as far as the alumni people that worked for the Alumni Association, they were very standoffish and cool, except for Sue and Ed. They were friendly, but the others, were not. And as a matter of fact, the people that we lived with, I wanted to say this, in the dorms, and we were friendly in the dorms, and in class. After graduation, I've not had any contact with any. There was one lady that lives up there in Northwest Indiana, and when we see each other, we can say, we speak and pass the pleasantries of the day. But there was you lived with someone for 4 years, but there was no ongoing relationship after Ball State. Whereas with our friends, that my roommate and Connie and her roommate, we're still friends after all these years. Though they live in different cities, we still call each other and we talk. So the ongoing relationships were not there. And it's the same thing with the Alumni Council that was there all of those years. It was a tentative, non-relationship. Mm-hmm. Even when I was there, someone, sitting down, chatting, talking, and sharing with each other, we didn't do that. They did it with each other, but we didn't do that.
Were you the only African American on the council?
No, There were, no, there were 2 or 3 others. We were friends. We would sit, chat, but there were 2 or 3 others.
And why do you think there was that disconnect?
I don't know. Black people being black and white people being white. There's nothing in common, I guess. Or we all may have had different agendas. I really don't know, and I really haven't thought that much about it. It did not bother me. I noticed it, but it did not bother me. Because when the meeting was over, I was in my car, headed back home.
Okay. You also served on the Black Alumni Constituent Society, or BACS, Board of Directors.
Mm-hmm.
What was that experience like?
It was interesting. We had fun. We were able to chat and talk more. I don't think that we chatted and talked about anything of significance, anything that was, substantial. I don't know that they got a whole lot done in that. I don't know if their hands were tied by the university or what, or they didn't have an active agenda, but I do know that they were able to have reunions, every 2 years, and people would come back. And actually, I think Ed told us at one time, our only reason for existing was for us to engage the alumni. Okay? And so I guess we were doing what we were supposed to do, engage the alumni. So, but I guess we engaged them by having the reunions, and then they would, come back. But I don't know that they actually gave a lot of to the university financially. It takes a long time for when a person graduates from, I am finding from, and I know it happened with me, from college, and you have a job, and it takes maturity, I think, to know that, hey, it's time to give back. You slid in on someone else's coattail. It's time for you to provide a medium or a means for someone else, to make someone else's life easier. And so I don't know how successful they have been in getting the black alums to give back to the university in a consistent, meaningful way. I don't know about that. So I guess I think that was one of the reasons that they exist, to engage and wow the alumni.
And how did your experience on the board of directors for the Constituent Society compare with your experience on the Alumni Council?
Well, it was certainly not as cold of an affair. It was a much warmer and friendly thing. And I thought that we at least could bring things to the table there, discuss them, and vote on them for something that we decided, not to serve as a rubber stamp for an agenda that had already been set by the executive board. Mm-hmm. So that was the difference between the two that I saw. We could bring up an idea, we could discuss something that we wanted to do in the constituency society and vote, to do it. Whereas with the alumni council, the executive council board decided what they wanted to do, how it was going to be done. They handed it down to us, and then we rubber stamped it. Everybody rubber stamped it. And I would imagine, I don't know if it's just that, but I do know that there were people who were on the executive council that were also trustees. So I don't know. I really don't have a feel for that, but I didn't feel that very effective.
Okay.
And I feel that I was on there because of the requirement that certain portions of, it's got to be diverse. And I fit one of the criteria, or some of the criteria for diversity, in that female, Black, Northwest Indiana.
Okay. So moving it forward just a little bit, you worked in the Gary school system for over 40 years until you retired in 2011. What was that like?
I worked during a time where you could actually get your work done. You can't do that anymore. You could be creative. You could try things. You could take your children on field trips. You could just see your children blossom, but you cannot do that anymore. Anymore, you're working, you're bound by red tape, you're bound by people in the legislature who, if they are in education, they've been away from education for so long, they've forgotten what it's about. School is no more fun for children nor for teachers. You're not given the latitude to do your job. And I came up during a time when you had the latitude to do your job. You had the latitude to make mistakes. You know, you learn from making mistakes. And we had the latitude to make mistakes, and it was nice. It was nice. And I retired because I was not feeling effective anymore. Because your hands get tied. You're encumbered with red tape. And so I retired. I am back now. I work 3 hours a day as an intervention specialist. And I can do more of what I used to do when I was enjoying teaching.
And in elementary education, they often say that many teachers don't make it past 5 years of teaching now. Why do you think your career was so long?
Well, most of the teachers that started with me or that were teaching before I did, they taught for as long as I did. It's now, I think, the teachers that have come in during the latter years that get burned out very quickly. They get disillusioned and they get burned out very quickly. When you take someone's creativity and their ability to do their job and be effective in doing their jobs away from them, that you get burned out real quickly.
And you had mentioned that your mother was a teacher and that you come from a family of teachers, really. Mm-hmm. How did this affect your teaching style?
My teaching style was strictly influenced by Ball State, from what I learned at Ball State. I never saw my mother teach, except for when she was, working with me. Your parents are your first teachers. So I never saw my mother teach. So what I learned from teaching was directly impacted, in which I must say is very positively, by Ball State. My grandmother, yes I did, I saw my grandmother teaching. It was in a little country school where she had about 2 or 3 different grade levels in a around a potbelly stove. And that was charming. My great grandfather died when I was a baby, so I didn't. But I would hear tales of him. He was a math teacher, and I have some of his books. And one of them was a little, Guthrie reader, and he was teaching himself Spanish in one. He had one Guthrie reader Spanish book, and he had one Guthrie reader French book, and he was teaching himself French and he was teaching himself Spanish. But he was a math teacher. And these are the tales that I hear, that he and his friends would get together on the front porch and they would try to solve these difficult math problems. And when one would get them, you just hear them laughing and slapping each other on the back. And you would think it was a poker game, but it wasn't. They were solving math problems. And it was to the point where he was so good as a teacher of mathematics, and I think he was he a super? I got his his certificate that was signed to as something as a superintendent or something. I can't remember. It was signed by the State Board of Education or something. Anyway, when some of the white people that lived in his area, when their children were having problems with math and they could not help their children, they would send them to Papa, and he would have to teach them. But I didn't know him, but I never saw my mother teach. But so what I do in teaching, I learned strictly from Ball State, and then from those colleagues who were outstanding master teachers.
Okay. Well, before we conclude, is there anything more that we haven't covered in this interview about your life or your career or your experiences at Ball State that you would like to comment on?
No, except that I had an excellent education. There were questions and disconnects that I recognized after I graduated and after I matured that didn't impact me while I was here and while I was much younger. And that may be the same experience that a lot of young people that are coming through college might have. But no, I think we've covered about everything.
Okay. Well, on behalf of the Ball State University African American Alumni Oral History Project, thank you so much for your participation today.
No problem. It was my pleasure.